Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships video today on our channel. In this episode we shall be featuring the Tier VII German Cruiser known as the Yorck. It is being featured in a Tier 7 domination match on the map New Dawn, and I am not sailing her today, but instead my good friend Ilmari, or Ben is. Whereby Ben submitted this replay to me a little while back in patch 0.5.11. It's his best game so far in World of Warships, and we're going to essentially review the gameplay, analyse what's good about it, and points for improvement for Ben. Because I really enjoyed this match, and hopefully you guys do too, especially as time goes on, where this match only gets more interesting. But, rather than big it up, let's talk about the initial situation. So Ben's team have all spawned in the southwestern corner of the map. Ben's electing to head towards the southeastern corner to try and take C, or at least help his team contest it, and then probably make his way up the eastern seaboard and push up into that northeastern corner before coming around to take B and A. But as he does, let's talk a little bit about the Yorck. Now for those who are unaware, and I personally haven't sailed many of the German cruisers available in game at the moment, but this is just from my observations, going against them in matches, and from speaking to Ben. The Yorck brings something different to the table at Tier 7 compared to its predecessors, particularly the Tier 6 Nuremberg and the Tier 5 Königsberg, whereby those ships had rather impressive guns, especially their armour piercing, but they lacked any effective armour. The Nuremberg, for example, only has a maximum of 50mm of armour. The Yorck, on the other hand, has a maximum of 80mm, turning the German cruiser line at this point more towards a heavy cruiser line in preparation for the Tier 8 ship, the Admiral Hipper, or the premium equivalent, the Prinz Eugen, which we have featured on this channel, rather than the lighter cruisers, the glass cannon of the earlier tiers. So the Yorck brings something different to the table. What about the guns? Well, again, they're brutal. 4 twin 210mm turrets, whereby there's 2 on the bow and 2 in the aft. These have very impressive armour piercing, with 1 armour piercing shell on a citadel doing a maximum of 5,500 damage. They have a range of 17.3km and a muzzle velocity of 900 meters per second. That muzzle velocity applies to high explosive shells as well as armour piercing, meaning that this ship can deliver the hurt at longer ranges with its armour piercing, and even has a 12% chance of setting a ship on fire with high explosive. Now the reload time of 12 seconds is one of the downsides of having all this impressive firepower, but you get used to it, and it will train you well for the 15-second reload if I remember correctly on the Admiral Hipper and the Prinz Eugen. But what else can we talk about? Well, she's a fast ship with 32 knot top speed and an 8.1 second rudder shift, meaning she's manoeuvrable and able to wiggle her aft in order to avoid torpedoes at closer ranges or incoming fire from battleships at extreme ranges. Now Ben has used his overall mobility to make his way towards sea quite rapidly, and he's going to take the lead to some extent in the effort to take C, although a friendly destroyer is also going to lead the way in. He's opening fire with high explosive at this point at one of 2 enemy battleships located towards the eastern edge of the map. We're not quite sure what they are, the shells are taking a long time to get to the target. Ben's scattering some shots over just to try and get some light damage on the board. He's being detected, he has fired of course, with a detectability by sea upon fire of 19.7km, and when you haven't fired that drops to 13.9km. Not as bad in terms of concealment as the Russian equivalents, from what I gather, but still, this is not the stealthiest of cruisers. And you have a detectability by air in the Yorck of 7.4km, although that's not too important here thanks to the lack of carrier aircraft, and the lack of carriers thereof. But as Ben now makes his way onto sea, we see the 2 enemy battleships that have made their way quite rapidly down the eastern edge, a Koenig and a Congo, 2 Tier 5 battleships, 1 German, 1 Japanese. Now he's dumping in some high explosive here on the Koenig. Note the low amount of damage being dealt compared to the Tier 7 Japanese cruiser for comparison, which has much more powerful high explosive shells. I believe that's a Miyoko, correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, he's dumping in the shells and capturing the area. But he is sailing broadside to that Koenig. And here comes the return armour piercing. Ooh. Well, we can take one good thing from that. He's demonstrated how the heavier armour of the Yorck has enabled him to survive what would have been a set of citadels in the case of the predecessor, the Nuremberg. But sailing broadside onto a battleship is always going to get punished eventually. It's a mistake we all make. But focusing on the positives, he set the Koenig on fire and now it's going to lose a lot of health. And on top of that, he got an assist in capturing C, which always helps. And in the way he distracted some fire away from his allied destroyer if it had been spotted, i.e. the Matsuki. But Now things are going to change a little bit. The tempo is going to get a little bit more interesting because Ben's cutting his speed, or at least manage it at 3/4 approximately where possible. Because the thing is, these two enemy battleships are being really aggressive. They're playing out of league compared to the rest of their fleet, meaning they have no support apart from each other. Now Ben's ally, the Mitsuki, i.e. the Japanese destroyer at Tier 6, can deploy a lot of torpedoes and cause disruptions to their twin formation, or just do a lot of damage if those torpedoes hit. Ben meanwhile can sit a little bit further back and uses high explosive in order to cause additional fires, and he sets one on the Congo. It's put the fire out, but still, that means its repair consumable has been taken away. And he's just creeping forward gradually at 1/4 speed now, making sure not to overshoot the rest of his fleet. Because note how in the minimap, 2 battleships on his team are lingering in sea and making their way out behind him. He's trying to stick with his fleet where possible, being the tip of the spear in some cases, such as now, if we discount the destroyer in front of him, but he's acting as that tip, whereby he's essentially leading the way for his battleships to follow through. He's got his bow pointed at an angle towards the Congo and a slightly greater angle to the Koenig, not to the point where it's an exposed broadside, but this means that the Congo is struggling to penetrate the bow, and when it does, it's only doing light damage. And there he takes a single over-penetration from the Koenig. He takes 2 more shells, one bouncing off of his bow, showing how he's angling his ship well in order to stay alive and not lose too much health. He does have 32,600 in the Yorck, but still that can go away very rapidly. He's already down to 2/3. He sets another fire on the Koenig at this point, using the high explosive fire chance very well. The Koenig is burning away, he's accreting a nice amount of damage on it, that's the second fire, so that's a real punishment. And now he's being surpassed by a friendly Nagato, i.e. Ben and the Nagato on his team, whereby he's been able to hold up these battleships and hold up his position long enough to provide room for his teammates to support him. The Nagato dumps in a load of armour piercing onto the bow of the Koenig, and Ben continues to drop high explosive shell to high explosive shell from his bow guns onto the Koenig. But at this point the Koenig is turning broadside, and Ben's already accounted for this by switching to armour piercing, because these armour piercing shells have the penetration to get through the upper broadside armour of a Koenig quite nicely, and we're going to see that here. In the space of 2 penetrations, 1,816 damage, a good haul. And with the Koenig continuing to expose a broadside to both Ben and his friendly Nagato, the Nagato puts in a lot of nice hits, and Ben can use his armour piercing to finish off the Koenig for his first kill. One thing to pick up on whilst we've been watching this, note how Ben used both his hydroacoustic and his fighter plane consumables together when he headed towards the landmasses around sea. Now this is smart thinking, simply because, as there's no carry in the game, the only use for a fighter would be to spot enemy ships around the other side of a landmass, alternatively torpedoes that are incoming, so he made himself less exposed to the potential for an ambush, as the enemy team did have a number of destroyers. But, switching back to what's going on. Now in Omaha very little health has been spotted, but he's not going to focus on that, instead he's turned his attention to the New York, which for the time being as Ben creeps towards the landmass off to his port side, at half speed, heading up to 3/4 speed. He tried dropping in some shells, but now he switched his attention to the Omaha. But he hasn't realised at this point he's too close to the landmass on his port side to be able to hit the targets he's firing at. So this is something he needs to pick up on, i.e. that little mountain symbol next to the crosshair. Every so often you can fire and hit with some shells with this symbol being present on your screen, but it's easier to wait and then come out into a position whereby you'll be able to get a cleaner shot. Well, that is always circumstantial, because if you're not being spotted, and you fire a landmass and the enemy team see a load of explosions on the landmass, they're going to know that you or one of your teammates is sitting there waiting to try and score some shots, either over the landmass or alternatively come out and provide an ambush. So it's something to consider. But now this is where it heats up, because a friendly Koenig off to Ben's starboard side is pushing forward. Ben's going to support her. He's doing this to split the fire of the 2 battleships ahead of him, a New York and another enemy Congo, if I remember correctly. Yep, because the thing is, if Ben was to allow his friendly battleship to go in there by itself, it would get cut to shreds by the twin fire of the high explosive of the New York and the armour piercing or high explosive of the Congo. But instead, by going forward, he's now going to split the New York into firing at him rather than his ally. Now as he goes down the middle, he's going to employ his torpedoes to great effect as well, because remember, and we haven't talked about this yet, the York has 4 sets of triple torpedo tubes, 2 on either side amidships. These have a 6 km range, a 64 knot top speed, and the ability to do a maximum of 13,700 damage per torpedo. And Ben fires off his torpedoes against the Congo. Sorry, my throat's going dry. Whereby he's fired the spreads slightly wide of one another to make sure the Congo is going to take at least 1 or 2 torpedoes. And we can come back to a mistake that's technically made there, or an inefficiency, let's say. We'll do that in a bit. As we watch the torpedoes go in, and at the same time Ben's also picking up some secondary hits on his foes, potentially the Congo rather than New York at this point. He picks up 2 target hits with his torpedoes on the Congo, causing 2 floods as well, a lot of damage, and he's also picking up more damage with the floods he's caused. And he's also picking up some more secondary hits on the Congo once again, and focusing his attention on the New York. And here he's fired off his torpedoes with a 6-kilometre range on a ship that's heading away from him at 5.7 kilometres distance. Those torpedoes are never going to make it to the target unless the New York turns into them completely right now. And that's something to be aware of as well. If an opponent is going away from you and you fire your torpedoes at the maximum range, you're never going to hit the target, simply because the enemy ship is just going to sail out of the effective range. If your opponent's sailing into your torpedoes when they're further away than your range, as listed on your torpedoes, then firing at a longer distance than your range can work. Either reverse. Now going head to head with New York here, Ben's taken a good number of hits. The New York is focusing with high explosive, it's their choice. Some of you may be wondering right now, why is the New York doing this? Why not switch to armour piercing? It happens from time to time. But Ben sets another fire, this time on the New York with high explosive, and he's used his hydroacoustic search because he's aware of the fact the enemy team still have a destroyer and it's off to his port side. So he wants to know as soon as those torpedoes are on their way from the enemy Hatsuharu. His torpedoes have reloaded now, and he gets ready to fire them off again, turning his starboard side towards the New York. This was a little bit unexpected, but I can see why, seeing as that means he'll be able to fire 2 sets of torpedoes down one side of the ship and have the set on the port side, which would have been more convenient in that situation, ready to hit the Hatsuharu, alternatively the New York. And he's also got an eye on those torpedoes coming in. His hydroacoustic search allowing him to see them well in advance, and they're not going to be a problem. Using his speed and manoeuvrability in the York to dodge them. And he's dumping in the high explosive now at the Hatsuharu, keeping his bow pointed towards the New York to minimise the effective damage from the New York. And he's doing a ton of damage to this Hatsuharu, tearing it to pieces. Another 2,500 ripped off. Another 3,000 ripped off. Picking up some secondary hits as well. Those torps are coming in, but he's using his speed to dodge them. Can he get around them? Yeah, he just got around them. They fell behind his aft. Oh, it's tight. And he's continuing to fire at this Hatsuharu. The slow turn time of his turrets at this point really holding him back, but he picks up another kill. And Ben's pushing forward. Some more torpedoes going in against the New York at this point. He saved his portside torpedoes for that New York. Unfortunately, he's not going to get the kill with the torpedoes, and the reason is because he fired them wide on both sets. And this is one thing that could be improved. The fact that he decided in both situations when firing off his torpedoes against the Congo and the New York to fire them wide. Now in the case of the Congo, that was travelling at speed and it wasn't stuck on a landmass, so that's understandable, you just want to get some hits. But in a situation like that against a New York, particularly one that's stuck on a landmass, a tight spread would have saved him just a little bit more time. That's being ultra critical at this point. Anyway, he picked up a high caliber medal as well. His teammates asking him how much damage he's got, that way his teammate I think wants to get a high caliber medal of his own. And whoa, that was a tight one. Now having made his way up into that northeastern corner, split 2 enemy ships, and also brought in the Hatsuharu and essentially helped his team eradicate some very powerful ships in the match and balance the game in favour of his team. Ben's now creeping back down towards the southwestern corner because the game's not quite over yet. There's still an enemy Scharnhorst alive, and the problem is the enemy team have got a lot more points in terms of domination points than Ben's team. By a margin of 130, and that's only going to widen as time goes on as the enemy team have 2 capture points to Ben's team's 1. Ben is making his way into B, he's playing objectively at this point, which is a good thing. Unfortunately, his ally in the Koenig is a little bit too close to the Scharnhorst and is going to get eliminated very shortly, which means that the Scharnhorst is only going to increase the points gap for their team. And with only 6 minutes left, this game could actually go into the hands of the enemy team through points, rather than ships being eliminated. There's now 2 ships left on Ben's team, including himself. The other, we're not sure what it is. We'll find out soon enough. It's a battleship of some description. And Ben's just creeping towards sea at this point at full speed. He's out of hydroacoustic searches, but he's probably not going to get too close to that Scharnhorst anymore. It does have torpedoes. What we have to consider is Ben's on very low health now. He's less than a third of his health remaining. And we can see the Scharnhorst is being spotted by his ally in the battleship. and Ben's just going to take B at this point. A rather placid takeover, not doing too much. Of course, the Scharnhorst is going to know that Ben's here by deduction as his ally opens fire, and the two go head to head at this point. Now, one has to ask at this point, what do you do in this situation when you've only got a small smidgen of your health left? There's an enemy battleship with roughly half its health left, and the enemy team have the initiative on pretty much all counts apart from the number of ships, as Ben zooms in to try and see where his shots land and realises they need to come a little bit lower. Holding fire there because the enemy ship hasn't been spotted, so if you do open fire and it's behind a landmass, the shells will go into the landmass. That's something to always be aware of. And he's continuing to take B, almost taking it. Well, in this situation, what Ben's going to do is a smart move. He's going to stick to his range. Because he has a 17.3 kilometre range, we talked about that earlier. He gets detected at this point, and what you have to consider is the concealment or the detectability by sea of the ship is not great, whereby it's 13.9 kilometres. And the Scharnhorst opens fire here, but Ben wiggles his aft out the way and uses his manoeuvrability on the hull to pull the distance and bait the Scharnhorst into essentially being shot at in the side by Ben's ally in a Koenig. He tries rushing away at this point, and the detectability by air of this ship is 7.4 kilometres for reference, not too important at this point. But this means that the Yorck is going to get spotted some way out, not to the distances of its Russian counterpart, the Shores, if I remember correctly that's its name, but still, it's something to worry about. So Ben's creeping away, the Scharnhorst seems more focused on the Koenig, although he keeps wiggling left to right, potentially getting ready to fire some more pot shots to try and finish off Ben. But gradually, it appears as though the Scharnhorst is actually turning away into the southwestern corner of the map, realising that he only needs to cause this game to drag on for a couple more minutes, and his team will win, simply because the points deficit now is too much for Ben's team to overcome, even if they do get the A flag. Ben's sailing away, the Scharnhorst 283mm cannon not penetrating his aft, or doing minimal damage when they do hit, with armour piercing. And as he pulls the distance at this point, he's now starting to use his long range, which we were just discussing, in order to do some damage. But he's firing high explosive, and this is the most important part. He's not going for points damage upon a hit, he's going for a fire. Because he knows with his allied Koenig being close enough, the two ships are exchanging secondaries. Alternatively, if the Koenig just uses some high explosive, it's going to set a fire on the Scharnhorst, which will be put out by the Scharnhorst player if they react too soon. And as a result, they won't have a consumable left to put out any fires Ben accomplishes. He hasn't accomplished any yet, that 12% fire chance not swinging in his favour. And Ben's team at this point are even saying to Ben, Yorck burning. But Ben's already got this in mind. He's thought this through well in advance. And he's heading towards A as well to try and pick up the point. Probably some more XP because it's not going to save the team. With only 2.5 minutes left, if just under that. But he continues to drop in the high explosive. At maximum range, high distance here of 16.5 kilometres. Leading the shots quite nicely, and that maximum dispersion of 153 metres being managed nicely as well. He causes a fire on the Scharnhorst, and that is the game. Because as we're going to see now, the Scharnhorst has put the fire out, but Ben is going to continue dumping in the rounds. And another fire is going to come very shortly as he wiggles into A, making sure not to keep too straight apart because he is exposing his broadside, but he has to do that to get all of his guns in to try and cause the fire he wants to set. So it's a trade up, but he's managing it nicely. Fires off his aft guns. And can he get that one last fire? Because we said it would make the game if he gets another one. Go on. Oh, not quite. There's only 1.5 minutes left on the board. And one round went into the mountain there. Again, the landmass is coming back to haunt Ben. But come on, I know we can get a fire. 12% is 12%. And there's another fire. And with that, the Scharnhorst can't put the fire out. Ben halts himself in the capture point, or just cuts his speed to 1/4. And that Scharnhorst is now going to burn to death very gradually. Let's enjoy the German barbecue. As the Scharnhorst gradually cooks herself into her grave. Ben throws in a couple more rounds. Unfortunately, he's not going to get the capture in time. But with 50 seconds left on the clock, the Scharnhorst is down to less than 2,000 health. Shells missing. Less than 1,000 health. Go on, 40 seconds left. And there we go. That's the end of the game. Time to take a look at the post-game stats. Now that was a close game. And for it, Ben received 240,463 silver credits, 2,496 experience, and picked up the High Caliber achievement, whereby he damaged at least 4 enemy ships, and the total damage he put out was over 30% of the total health pool of the enemy team. In terms of his battle performance, he dealt 138,779 damage, consisting of 146 target hits with main batteries, 4 torpedo hits, 1 enemy aircraft shot down, 3 incapacitations, 4 enemy ships destroyed, 8 fires set, 4 floods caused, 1 base captured by himself, 1 assisted capture, and 26 secondary gun hits. Looking at the team scores, we can see that Ben led the way on his team in terms of base experience earned, picking up 582 more than second place. Whilst he didn't essentially carry his team to victory, he was a crucial asset for his team, which would have been sorely missed if he wasn't there. Looking at Ben's detailed report, we have 2 important items to note here, both within the damage caused category. The first one's very specific and relates to the usage of high explosive shells in the Yorck, whereby we said time and time again during the course of the gameplay that high explosive shells for the Germans are not usually as effective as other nations in like-for-like tier ship comparisons. But that did not deter Ben, who used his high explosive very effectively because in the majority of cases he did not have sufficient angles against his opponents to use armour piercing to maximise his damage. So instead, on base damage alone, his high explosive accounted for just under half of his total damage. The second item is a wider one in terms of damage caused, whereby we can see that Ben used every asset of his ship in terms of firepower to do as much damage as possible. His damage wasn't localised to his main battery damage. Okay, that accounted for just under half of his total output, but notice that the other 2 remaining quarters are spread roughly equally between torpedo damage and other damage in terms of fires and floods caused, whereby not only did he do base damage with his weaponry, i.e. his guns and his torpedoes, but also in terms of the bleed damage from the fires and floodings. He did as much damage as possible using every element of the ship, and that's something that we should all aspire to do. In some matches we may find that the usage of our torpedoes rather than our guns is going to be more effective, but it's getting the most out of your ship's elements that's going to be really important, as we saw in that Gnevny gameplay a couple of weeks ago, and it's reflected here again by Ben. You have a number of items on your ship, do not be afraid to use all of your assets when and where appropriate. To conclude, going by the mantra that no gameplay is flawless, where can Ben improve even further? Well, there's 2 points for today. The first one a minor one, looking out for the mounting symbol when you open fire with your guns to know whether your rounds are going to hit a landmass or not. A number of times Ben did not do this, and quite a few rounds went into landmasses rather than the ships that were being aimed at, such as the very weak Omaha at the start of the game. By looking out for this symbol and judging your position accordingly, you can actually maximise the effectiveness of your rounds and thereby make the difference over the course of a game in terms of a couple thousand, if not a large amount of HP of damage dealt. For example, if you see an enemy cruiser broadside to you and you just hold back your armour piercing shells for a little bit until that mounting symbol goes, that will enable you to citadel the opponent rather than just hit the landmass and become frustrated. The other item of discussion, a more important one, is in terms of torpedo usage, i.e. knowing when to use wide and tight spreads. When Ben split the New York and the Congo from one another, he fired his torpedoes at both ships. The distance away from the Congo that he was more ideal for the usage of a tight spread, enabling Ben to maximise his damage and potentially pick up the Kraken on the Congo. Now of course, scoring a couple of hits with his torpedoes on the Congo made a huge difference to the game, but using a tight spread would have eliminated it faster, and in that position where he was only approximately 4 kilometres away, he could have potentially judged that with one set if not both. But still, in the same manner, with the New York that was marooned on the landmass, that was more ideal for a tight spread, with the New York having to reverse out, and that could have freed up Ben to move away from the New York, i.e. having eliminated it, and making his way towards a capture point or towards the enemy Scharnhorst, with a little bit more speed and perhaps a little bit more health. But still, these are small drops in the ocean of success that was today's gameplay, and thank you Ben for submitting this to me. It just goes to show that with a little bit of confidence, nerve and tactics in your Yorck, you can run the gauntlet and survive to the very end. Therefore, if you've enjoyed this video, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe for future World of Warships videos on this channel. If you think I've been too harsh or too kind on Ben, be sure to let me know in the comments section below. But otherwise, have a great day, or evening or night depending on where you are, and until next time ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.